guys, welcome back to the last part of this 4-part series. Let's just jump right into it. The first thing that I'm going to do is put a light layer of the Liquid Original over the eyes. I like to start in the eyes and then work my way out. It just keeps me from sticking my hand into anything that I don't want to stick my hand into and messing up the painting. So I'm starting with a lighter orange that I'm going to be putting inside of the eye to put a reflective light in there. Make sure that you don't lose what you did in the previous layers, but you do want it to be a little bit lighter than what you did in the previous one. I'm going in with some ultramarine blue and some burnt umber mixed to make a very nice dark. Like I said in my previous videos, I don't like to use black except for in the pupil and in the nostrils. So I will use this going around the eye to give that more depth of the eyes being sunken in. Now in this part of the stage of the painting, you want to make sure that you are getting your lightest lights and your darkest darks. That's what you're going to be looking for. And as you notice, when you look at this goes for people and for pets, a lot of people make the mistake of not putting in the actual, I don't know exactly what part of the eye this is, but you have a separation of where the inside and the outside, I guess it's like the inner lid part. You need to make sure that you get that if you're trying to go for something realistic. People and animals have it, so just make sure you're paying attention to that. Now in this part of the stage, we really want to make sure, like I said, that we are going for the lightest lights and the darkest darks. This is where you're going to be possibly using white. You don't want to use a whole lot of white, but you're going to be using white for the brightest highlight in the eye, maybe some highlights on the teeth, and a few highlights on the tips of fur. That's mainly where I'm going to be using any of my whites at. So I'm going in with just some black. Like I said, this is where I'll actually use black on the pupils of the eye, and it seems to be okay. It doesn't give too much of a matte look when it's dry. And now I'm going in on the other eye, and this time I mixed some of that orange with a little bit of white to get a little bit lighter, to get that bottom part and the side of the eye, just to give another layer of depth that you want. And that'll give the eyes a nice roundness to them if you make sure that you pay attention to the different tones and the different colors and the different hues in the eye. Make sure that you get around the eye nice and dark to give that sunken appearance. And I'm going just back and forth. Now I'm noticing on the inside of the whites of the eye, a lot of times you'll notice like little watermarks on the inside of an animal's eye. So you started off with that base layer of using a gray tone, and then you'll put little specks of actual white, and it'll make the eyes look like they're wet. So now I'm happy with the eyes, and I'm going to move on to the nose. I put another thin layer of the Liquid Original. And now I'm going in with my paint, and I am just looking for those lights and darks. I noticed that for the shadows and the darks for this dog's nose, it's really purples. So I wanted to make sure that I put in a nice dark purple to give a very three-dimensional look to the dog's nose. Now I'm putting in a little bit of highlights, and you want to pay attention to the color that you did before. And usually, just to get a highlight color for this final stage, is you add a little bit more white, and that's all that you really have to do, and it's always seemed to blend out very nicely. When you look at a dog's nose, sometimes it will have a lot of texture and sometimes it'll be smooth, so make sure that you're paying attention to that too as you're painting. Coco's nose, it was pretty textured, so instead of doing brush strokes, I actually just dabbed onto the painting, and it gives a very nice effect to show the texture on the nose. So I'm going in now with that black. Like I said, I only use black on the pupils and inside of the nostrils. And it just really seems to give that depth that I need for this area. Just going back and forth. A lot of times with certain areas, if you got purples and pinks, you will actually use some blues in there too. So make sure that you really pay attention to that. If you're not sure about the color that you're seeing, I use Corel Painter, which I've talked about in previous videos, and then I use just the dropper tool, and that will actually show me the colors that are in the painting. So I'm pretty happy with what I've done with the nose there. I'm moving on down to the mouth, and same thing here. I like to use the Liquid Original, and I do it by sections, especially when I'm working in these smaller areas, because Liquid Original will dry in a couple of hours. So I don't want to put in a layer all over the painting to begin with, just because I do really like to take my time with the final details, and I want to make sure that I have an adequate amount of time in that particular area without worrying about it actually drying on me. So here, I really paid attention to the back part of the mouth. On top of the tongue, it was very, very dark, so I used a dark purple for that, mixing alizarin crimson with ultramarine blue, and that gave me a very nice dark purple. The lip area, I actually just I used that same purple, and I mixed it in with a lot of the Liquid Original to give me a very nice glaze. I glazed that over the entirety of the lip, except for where that nice highlight is there. So I'm just looking everything over, comparing it to my reference photo. And I noticed that there are some very nice highlights there on the teeth. So I want to make sure that I get that. And I'm actually using pure white here to get these highlights. And a lot of times with dogs' teeth, you'll notice a lot of purples and blues. So whenever you are doing your pet portrait, make sure that you pay attention to that. She actually had some purples on one side of the teeth there. So make sure that you pay attention to that. And that's actually what your shadow is going to be those light shaded purples. Sometimes it can be grays. And then for the highlights, you either want to use like a very light gray and then go on top of it again with the white. And that's just going to give all these different layers of color, which is going to make it look more realistic. And I really think that you'll be happy with the final result. So now I'm ready to move on. I've got those final details. I think that the face is the most important part of a pet portrait. So like I said, I really like to pay, the most detail and most attention to that area. After I do that, I go ahead and I brush on a thin layer of Liquid Original over the entirety of the rest of the dog. And that also lets me see any of the colors that kind of maybe have a matte look to them. And once you varnish a painting, or even when you put on this Liquid Original, it will really bring out the vibrance back into the painting, so you actually have a real true, what's the word I'm thinking of? Oh, I can't think right now. But actually what it's going to look like after you varnish it. So I like to go ahead and put a thin layer on there. Now here I'm actually just doing glazes. When I do fur, I like to do a lot of glazing instead of trying to cake on a bunch of different colors. So, and like I said, to do the glaze, you just use the Liquid Original. And here I'm actually using a lot of purples to get those very dark areas. And when you put that glaze on there, it just gives a lot of depth. Now Coco, she actually has a lot of purples. I used a lot of burnt sienna with her because, burnt sienna has kind of an orange tone to her, especially around the eye area. A lot of the purple you'll see there on the left side of the painting, underneath that white. And then as she's laying on the floor, there's actually quite a bit of purple there also, and on the back part of her body. So what I'll do is I'll use those glazes to glaze over that, and it really gives a nice depth to it without losing the detail that I did in the previous layers in the previous videos. So I'm going through and I'm seeing any areas that I can use this purple to add the glaze. And as you can see, it's already starting to get another layer of depth. And that's exactly what you want to see when you're doing a realistic painting. So now I'm going to go in and start adding some of my highlights. I noticed that she had quite a bit of gray. And so I'm making sure that I notice those areas. I don't want to go in with straight white. Whenever you're adding highlights, you want to build it up very slowly, especially when you're using white, because white, if you make one mistake with white and you put too much and you try to blend it out, it's going to look so chalky. Then you're going to have to stop and you're going to have to wait and you're going to have to let it dry, and then you're going to go back in, and you're basically, you know, giving yourself twice the amount of work. So when you're using white, be very sparingly with it. Slowly build up your layers. Save those final whites for the very last part of your painting. Even as I'm doing this in the details, I don't want to go full white. I'm using a mix of the not the ultramarine blue, but I'm using a mix of the burnt umber with a lot of white. It's not completely white, and as you see, it's already given that look of white. On the back part of the tail, I'm using the same, but just a little bit more burnt umber to give, you know, different tonal values that I'm looking for here. And I still used the same technique as the back and forth motion. It was really important here on the leg because of the way that she was laying on the ground, and it really gave that nice swooshy motion that you wanted to see because she was laying on the ground. Now I noticed that back here in the back, it wasn't quite dark enough, so I actually did a mix of a little bit more of the ultramarine blue mixed with burnt umber and just a tiny bit of black. Made a glaze of that and started applying that to the back layer. This is the darkest part of the dog. So I wanted to make sure that I got that because the light was coming in from the top right, and then so the left part of the dog is going to have the darkest shadows. Make sure that you really pay attention to where your light source is coming from. That's very important whenever you're trying to do a painting. So here I'm using that same glaze. I added a little bit more white, which gave a nice purple, a very, very light purple compared to that dark, even though it's really not that light. But it gives the division that you need to show that little bitty row that she had going on there on her side. I don't know if it was a row or if maybe it's her little ribs. I know if it was my dog, it's probably a row. And I noticed up here at the top that the highlights were not bright enough. Make sure that when you are putting on those highlights that you don't cover up what you did underneath. If you put too much on there at once, you're going to lose everything that you did in the previous layers, and you don't want to do that. So make sure that you're not covering up what you did in the previous layers, because if you do, then you're defeating the purpose. You're going to lose a lot of depth in your painting, and you just don't want to waste your time doing that. So as you notice here, especially on the right side of the dog, like I said, that's where the light was coming in. So that hair there is going to be bright. I actually used straight white for that, and that's going to be one of the brightest parts of the dog. I'm moving on to the bottom leg. Make sure that you pay attention to the length of the hair. This was the area where the length was a lot shorter than the rest of the dog. She's a very fluffy dog. So when you're blending, you want to make sure that you blend with your mop, that you get that fluffy, well-blended look. But on her legs, the hair was a lot shorter. So I used a flat I believe it was a number, it was a pretty big brush, maybe a 6, if I remember correctly. Maybe even a 8 flat. And I used that, got a nice chisel edge, and then I slowly did those brush marks. Because the shorter the brush stroke, the shorter the hair is going to look. Now I'm going in with a number 8 flat. And for this painting, I used the Marte, I believe was the brand. And I really like those brushes. You know, I'm not sponsored or anything, but I ordered them off of Amazon and I really liked them. When I first got them, they had a horrible chemical smell, so just kind of be aware of that. But after about a week of airing them out, they got a lot better. And as far as the brushes go, I love the brushes. I wanted to make sure that underneath that leg, I got that nice shadow. And that'll help to ground the animal so it's not seeming like it's just floating in the painting. All right, now I really want to focus on the center part. Like I said, I really think that this is your focal point. This is where you really need to try to have it as accurate as you can if you're going for realism. So I wanted to make sure that the shadows on the dog's nose area, the snout area, you have to really pay attention to that to make sure you get the shape right. And here I use a lot of grays, purples, browns, white, that white mixed with the burnt umber. I use a wide variety of colors here to get that. And you can see it gives that appearance of having a line of where the snout is coming out and where it meets, and then where her fluff starts to fluff up underneath her chin. You'll get all these effects if you really pay attention to the colors and the tones. And if you mess up, like right there, I made a little mistake, it got a little too dark, just take a Q-tip and just wipe it. It's very simple. It's one thing about oil painting is it's very forgiving. Whereas other mediums like acrylic, they dry pretty fast. So that's one thing that I really do like. If I see something and I just don't like it, then I can go back over it, or I can erase it with a Q-tip. And I noticed here that she had this white coming up and it went up into her eye. And I didn't really like it. And this is an example of, you know, where it's something that I missed during the initial stages and I tried to fix it. And as I blend it here, you see it start to get chalky. And I take a Q-tip and I try to, you know, fix it. And it's just, it's making the painting look horrible. So I take my Q-tip, I go in and I erase it. And it's just one of those things that you're just like, ugh, I wish I could have fixed this, but I missed it. And that's going to happen. You know, you can't be perfect all the time. You're going to miss things. Just do the best that you can. And, you know, cross your fingers that your client's going to love it. Now here I'm adding in the highlights there to really shape the lower part of the jaw of the dog. And you notice that there's a nice separation. You have a highlight, and then you have a dark, and then you have a nice highlight again. And that's just going to really add the separation that you need. So when people look at it, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's where the nose of the dog is separated. I hope that makes sense. So now I'm just going back and looking at my reference. I noticed that this area needed to be darkened up. I used a purple and did a glaze here. As you can tell, you pretty much use the same colors over and over and over. purples, browns, sometimes blues, pinks. She had a little bit of pink there in her nose. And it's just a matter of adding a little bit of dark to make them darker, or using a little bit more white to make it a little bit lighter to get those final color values that you want. As you see here, I'm doing a nice brush stroke to get the eyebrow area. And when you're looking at a painting in the previous stages of the blocking in, you want to try to look to the layer below the final highlights. And when you put in your final highlights, it's just a matter of adding a few here and a few there, but not losing what you did in the blocking in stages. And that's going to really give the appearance of a lot of fur without having to paint in every single fur stroke. So I'm just working at the top part of the ear here. She has a very nice highlight and doing very short strokes because the hair here is a lot shorter. Adding in a glaze of the dark, and going back and forth until I get the desired look that I want. With my brush strokes, I do like to use that number 8 flat, and when I do, I get a nice chiseled edge. I put my brush flat and push in, and then I do a nice sweeping motion, and as I do that motion, I lift my brush up and it gives me that nice tapered edge. You want to do that no matter which brush that you're using, whether it's a short, like a small number 6 or 4 or 2, whatever it is that you're doing. If it is fur, you want to make sure that you do that stroke. It's just going to give those nice chunks of fur, if that's what your dog looks like. And in here, most dogs do have those big chunky parts of fur. It's important too to make sure that you are going back and forth with a mop brush. In the details, use a smaller mop. If you're doing a, like the body or something like that, I like to use a 3/4 to a 1 inch mop brush. And it just gives that nice fluffy blended appearance that you want to have with your animals. And this technique you can actually use with, pretty much anything. Whether it's wildlife. I have more videos on my channel of, horses, cats, dogs, a wide variety. I'm going to be posting up later on I think I'm going to be doing a gorilla. Like I've said in other videos, I'm actually doing the Mozart Studio pet course. And it's a great course if you haven't checked it out. She's a fabulous teacher, and she has a YouTube channel if you would like to check her out. So I'll be posting time lapses of those. I don't want to, post anything like this that isn't something that I've done. It's her pictures, her references. But she's an amazing teacher if you want to check her out. But I will be posting some of those later if you would like to check those out too. I actually have a playlist of just my speed paintings. Alright, so back to the video here. I noticed that she does have a collar that's sticking out just a little bit. I previously had just put a layer of yellow ochre on there. And now I'm going in with some yellow ochre and just lightening it up with a little bit of white to give those, different dimensions of the leash. And then on the tip there, I used just a little bit more white, lightened it up a little bit more, just to give a final highlight there on the edge. As you go farther out on the body, it doesn't have to be as detailed. You kind of want it to not have as much detail, so the main focus is on the center of the face. I am going down here to the body now. I noticed that this area just still wasn't quite dark enough, so I'm going in with a little bit more of a glaze there, using that purple. And making sure that it is blended really well between my darks and my lights. You want it to be overlapping. That's what's going to make it look realistic. Here on this side, she actually has, you know, some little white hairs that almost kind of look grayish going over that dark, so I want to make sure that I get that too. She was such a beautiful dog. I love doing this painting. I've never done one with such fluffy fur like this, and the colors on her were beautiful, and I really enjoyed painting her. So I'm going in and just getting those hairs that were going over that top part of that gray there. I lost a little bit of the dark, so I went back in and redid it. I'm going now on the tail, and as you see, I'm able to put my hand here. This is the next day. It ended up drying on me. Like I said, I paint a little slow, so I had to stop. I let it dry, and I did the same thing again. I started putting on those extra highlights that I wasn't able to get on the previous day. I don't want to try to rush any type of painting that I'm doing. And as soon as you start to paint and you notice any type of paint picking up, then you should stop. Let it dry, go on to the next day. And as you see here, I'm doing that motion where I push the brush down and I flick it. That is exactly what you need to do. On the back end, use a mop, blend it out, but don't blend out the end or you'll lose that tapered edge that you worked so hard just now to get. Keep blending that out. And here I'm really focusing on going a little bit lighter. I just wasn't completely happy with the colors on the back part of the dog there. And she had a little bitty toenail that was sticking out. It was kind of hard to see, but I did see it that next day. And that's another good thing. After you've been painting for a while and you've been staring at a picture or a reference photo, you start to lose those little details, like her little toenail there that was sticking out. So sometimes it's good just to step back, take a day or two, go back to the painting, and there'll be so many things that you didn't realize that you missed originally. So I'm going back here and just blending out that last little bit. Look at her little toenail, looks so cute now. Looking over everything, noticing right here, I can still go a little bit darker, so that's what I'm doing around the eyes. And sometimes you'll notice as you do these paintings, and like I said, after you let it set for a couple days and you go back and you say, I really think that I could take this just a little bit darker. So as you can see, adding that little bit of darkness there around the eye again, it just really gives that roundness, that sunken in look, that the eyes are actually into the eye sockets. That's exactly what you want. So here I'm just going back in again with black, just those little final details of things, you know, as you blend things out with a mop and stuff like that, they kind of get lost. And that is it for this painting. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. I'm adding in those final highlights as you see in there at the end of the video. But I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, please like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video.